If you pay attention to the news or politics for long enough, at some point you will hear something about changing exchange rates and a currency, the dollar, pound, euro, whatever, becoming weaker or stronger. If you have a curious mind, you might wonder what that means exactly, how it happens, and why it matters. After all, the average person only really sees these changes directly when they travel and need to exchange their currency for another one. But this topic is very important. Exchange rates are at once a battleground and a scorecard in the struggle of nations to gain an upper hand in trade and to seek a better life for their citizens. In my last video, we discussed how a country's level of development and economic organization has a big impact on the average wage level, especially in comparison to other countries. I strongly recommend that you go and watch that video before getting into this one, because today's topic on trade patterns and exchange rates is going to build on that foundation a little and give us another perspective for thinking about wage differences and buying power for normal people. So, without further ado, let's go! Okay, so in the last video we talked about the technology story and how that relates to wage levels. Today it's all about the trade story and how trade can affect how much the same wage is actually worth. So the basic trade story has to do with the difference between what we can call tradable goods and non-tradables. The distinction is simple enough. Tradable goods are things that can be traded. TVs, cars, furniture, oil, you name it. You can buy it from me, I can put it on a boat, and I can send it to you without too much trouble. But not everything you buy is like that. What about a haircut? If I live in the US, I can't pay to import a haircut from China. I guess I could pay for the plane tickets to bring a Chinese barber to me, get a haircut, and then send them back. But at that point, it's no longer cheaper, and there's no real reason for me to do it. For the most part, if I want to buy a haircut, I have to get it from somebody who lives in my country. The same thing is true for a taxi ride, a medical checkup, or the services provided by my government. It's true for many, many other things as well, like housing and land, and though it is definitely technically tradable, even most basic food items are often de facto not traded. Now this might sound like a small distinction between things that can and cannot be traded, but it has huge implications for how the prices of things vary from place to place. The issue with tradable goods is this. If I want to buy a phone made in China, I have to pay enough to cover the wages of the Chinese person who made it, as well as the cost of the parts and the materials which came from other specific countries and so on. And those costs, they don't change no matter what country I'm in. So the cost of that phone as a percentage of my income is going to depend, of course, on how high my income is, but that in turn is going to depend on what the average income level is in my country. But it isn't really the same when it comes to non-tradables. Since my barber lives in my country, their wages are going to change along with the average wages in my country. That means that the cost of my haircut as a percentage of my income is not going to depend quite as much on the average income level in my country. In fact, for a complex constellation of reasons that I'm not going to explain in detail here, the cost of these kinds of things might actually be more affordable relative to average incomes in lower income countries. The difference in how these costs compare to average wages is a matter of the distinction between the local and foreign content of a price. Now, every price that I pay has some local content. Some of the shipping for the phone that I bought happened in my country, with truck drivers who get paid local wages. And the employees at the store where I bought the phone, well, they get paid in local wages too. So the final price that I pay, which includes all of that, will, of course, be a little lower in a lower income country. But for most tradables, the actual production cost of the item itself makes up the largest portion of the final price. Similarly, the prices of many non-tradable things have tradable content. Like the taxi, the car itself, is totally tradable and probably imported, but still, that one taxi works for a very large number of trips. So the majority of each taxi fare is still going towards paying people who live locally and earn local wages. So essentially, things that are produced or services that are provided locally are going to vary in price along with the wage level in a country. But things that are produced and traded internationally will not see quite as much price variation. Ultimately, this means that people in lower income countries are much less able to afford various modern products that are traded internationally. Although a worker might be able to afford things like housing, food, and clothing just fine, the basic necessities, they will be less likely to be able to afford as many cars, electronics, pieces of machinery, etc., as those of us who live in wealthier countries. At the same time, many of these kinds of products have become functional necessities for modern life and for modern societies. As a result, countries which don't produce these things need to import them, and they have no choice but to pay a price based on the labor costs of other countries. But it isn't just the people who want to buy the finished products who are affected by this issue. No. A country with a car factory probably doesn't produce every part of the car themselves. They'll need to import parts and raw materials to put together, like the mechanical components, the steel, electrical wires, fabric, plastics, and so on. And they might produce some of it themselves, but certainly not all of it. And on the flip side, many countries have industries which can only exist on a large scale because they export the product. I'm mostly thinking of primary goods industries here, like oil, minerals, cash crops, and so on, but honestly, it also applies to things like the car factory example in most cases. A country which relies on exporting something is similarly restricted in what price they can charge. They have to charge enough to pay their workers, but if they charge too much, then people will just buy from a different country. And if that international price goes down, well, yours probably has to go down with it. Now, the real reason we're talking about all of this is that these international prices can change for you even if they don't change for anyone else. How? Well, this is where we start to talk about exchange rates. Things are about to get a little bit more complicated, so be prepared to follow closely. So we all know what an exchange rate is. It's how much of one currency you have to give up in order to get a certain amount of a different currency. Another way to look at that is that it's the price of one currency in terms of another. And it's important to note that currency markets are just about the purest example that exists of prices being determined by supply and demand. Stick with me here and we'll see how it interacts with trade. Let's say I live in the US and you live in Europe. You make chairs and I want to buy one. Cool. Problem is, being an American, I get paid in US dollars, and US dollars are all that I have. But you don't want those. Obviously, you living in Europe, if you want to buy anything, well, you need euros in order to pay for it. So euros is all you're interested in. So in order for me to import one of your chairs, I have to somehow trade my dollars for euros. Only then can I pay you. But because I don't have any euros and you don't have any dollars, some third party has to facilitate that exchange. That third party is effectively selling euros to me at a price set in dollars. But every price can be seen in both directions, so at the same time, I'm also selling dollars to them for a price set in euros. If they can find a use for my dollars, like, I don't know, selling them to some European who wants to buy an American product, well, that's fine. But what if they can't? What if there are more people trying to trade dollars to buy euros than the other way around? In that case, whoever is facilitating this trade is going to start seeing the dollars pile up unused, and they'll start running out of euros to give. To avoid this, they have to adjust the prices in order to make the numbers balance out. They're going to have to tell me that euros are more expensive now, and I need to pay them more dollars in order to get the same amount. So this is basically how exchange rates change. And it has some interesting implications. Countries that export more than they import will see excess demand for their currency, which means that their currency gets stronger. The price that people have to pay in order to get your currency will increase, and the price that you have to pay in order to get any other currency will decrease. But note what has not changed. The prices of the products and the wages of the labor denominated in their own local currencies has not changed at all. In other words, if you were paid 10 euro before, you're still getting paid 10 euro. The only difference is that where you used to be able to use that 10 euro to buy $12, you can now use it to get $15. For you, that's good news. You can now buy more stuff from the US with the same amount of your own money. Imports for you have just gotten cheaper. And if you're regularly buying a lot of things with foreign content, well, this is basically an effective increase in your wages. But there's a downside. Because of this change in exchange rates, Americans now have to pay more of their money in order to get the same amount of your stuff. So your exports have just gotten more expensive for everyone else to buy. Now, as you might expect, the same thing happens in reverse for a country which imports more than they export. They're trying to buy other currencies and sell a lot of their own, so the price that they have to pay in order to get other currencies goes up. The worker making $10 still gets $10, but instead of exchanging it for €8, now they can only get 6 or 7. So, imports have become more expensive, an effective wage decrease if they pay a lot of prices with high foreign content. But their exports are now cheaper for everyone else to buy. Basically, the more you export, the stronger your currency, and the more you import, the weaker your currency. The more you export, the harder it is to export more, and the easier it is to import more. Conversely, the more that you import, the harder it is to import more, and the easier it is to export more. Going either way changes exchange rates to push you in the opposite direction. And importantly, it doesn't actually matter why the money is moving from one currency to the other. It could be products that people are buying, of course, but it doesn't have to be. For instance, economists consider tourism to be an export because it is functionally the exact same thing. People from other countries are buying your currency and using it to pay people in your country. It also works if people just want to save their money in your currency, right? Which is what happens a lot for the US dollar. Foreign countries often keep reserves of US dollars for a few different purposes. But let's tie this back in with the earlier conversation about tradables and non-tradables. Say your country's currency has just gotten significantly weaker for some reason. Prices for non-tradables are not going to change much for you, but you will suddenly see an increase in the price of any tradable products that are imported. Now, maybe that will just make people in your country more likely to choose locally made products instead of the imported ones. If this is what happens, then your country will import less, and that will help to balance out the changes of the exchange rate. Maybe your country has some good export industries that can suddenly sell a lot more because other countries' currencies have just gotten stronger relative to yours. That would also help balance out the changes. But what if you don't have the relevant local products for people to choose? What if you don't have much to export, or you simply can't increase production enough? What if your economy and your society is reliant on certain imports, and the cost for you to import suddenly goes up? Well, those price changes will ripple throughout your whole entire economy, increasing the prices of everything, forcing wages to rise so that working people can still afford to eat, which will then cause prices to rise even further. Now, this is one potential cause for inflation and inflationary cycles, and it is always, every single time, the major cause and the trigger for the economic nightmare that we call hyperinflation. Now, that word might have just gotten a few ears to perk up. Hyperinflation is, you may have noticed, a fairly popular topic among keyboard warriors of a particular political persuasion with an interest in economics. But it's often brought up as a sort of unfounded and unjustified doomsday warning by people who want to reduce the phenomenon to an issue of simple government spending. But real-world instances of hyperinflation are very particular on the details. A number of pretty specific things need to happen in order for it to occur, and that's just not how most right-wingers talk about it online or on TV. It's a super interesting subject, though. Maybe next time we'll do a little case study. See an example of how trade, industry, and exchange rates can help to explain how hyperinflation happens. Could be fun. Maybe I'll see you then.